Greetings once again. I am Professor Know-It-All from Ivory Tower University, and I'm here to tell you things that you couldn't possibly know about science with my assistant's assistant,
Mark
Tamerdal. He claims to be a doctor.
Yeah.
What are we going to discuss today, Mark?
We're gonna start talking about crowdsourced science. That's
Crowd and science in the same sentence.
How
does that work?
Where the comment just about anybody who can walk and chew gum can make a contribution to science. And probably, I'm guessing that your idea about crowdsourced science is very different from mine. I'm guessing.
Well, because I have an idea.
Your idea is probably more along the lines of people, making a little contribution to say support your research, and then you would take their money and do what's best for them.
Well, that's the way that it's done, Mark.
Oh,
Let me tell you, yes.
Why don't you tell you what? Let's describe a little.
Crowdsourced science is taxpayers paying the federal government to dole out small percentages of that money to registered official scientists at ivory towers all across the country. We can take that money, we can spend it for 10 or 15 years. And of course, not do anything that's terribly irritating.
Well, let's do a sample study. Just discuss how you might do a sample study for, let's say, studying whether or not a new way of doing things would work.
Well, hold on just a moment.
That?
You're going to do something new.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's unacceptable. In traditional science, it's essential that you only do something when you know what the result is going to be. Are you aware of that?
Sounds like power analysis.
Yes, it does. This is why we do power analysis in all of our research. Power analysis is when you do the statistics on the results of your study before you do the study.
Oh.
It's extremely efficient. You know the answer before you even ask the question.
Well, maybe that's why I always got into trouble with institutional review boards when they said, what's the result of your study going to be?
You continuously get these irritating results. And if you do power analysis, you always know in a nice, comfortable, and safe way that your study is going to have exactly the results that you predicted.
That's time for you.
Get off! Beat it!
So,
get out of there! Okay, who left the door open? Who left the door open? Let me
welcome to another episode of Grumpy Science. And,
that went on for a while.
Yeah, it was way too long.
So long.
Jeez, man.
What were you guys talking about?
You're talking about how similar your haircut is to Professor Know-It-All's.
I got a bad head today, so it's a bad hair day today at Grumpy Science.
Yeah.
For me anyway.
That's why my hat's always on. It keeps me from having a bad hair day.
Yeah, there you go. What's this nonsense?
Well,
Professor Know-It-All?
Yeah.
No. This is Grumpy Science.
You betcha.
Welcome back to the world of the sane.
Yeah, and so what we got to do is lay down the groundwork for crowdsourced science. And, the beginning of the groundwork of anything we do is what makes you grumpy?
Well,
and basically what kinds of things in science make you grumpy, and that would lead us to something like crowdsourced science. Now, you weren't here when Professor Know-It-All said what his idea of crowdsourced science is.
Oh, I certainly wasn't here.
Yeah,
I'm sure I would have strangled
didn't hear that. His idea about crowdsourced science is that the crowd provides all the sources necessary for science.
Yeah, funny, right?
So,
this is not so ridiculous. I mean, we talk about crowdsourced science. I think the development of computers is an excellent example. In the early 1960s,
you're pointing at me just because I was born before you?
Because we were born. Yeah, he's my elder, so I have respect for him. Hey, look, when computers came out, the way you could buy a computer for many years was I would bike down to the Radio Shack, and you buy parts, and then you take them home, you solder them together, and then some red and green LEDs would blink, and you have a computer. And computers are the result. They're technology that results from crowdsourcing technology and crowdfunding it. Okay, all of computers nowadays are because people were buying them for their home, playing games with them, using them for things, and creating a market for them. And they were not developed in some ivory tower.
That's right.
Right? I mean, all of computer and related technology. Okay, it was initially funded by pretty much by World War II and then the Apollo program to get the basic technology to sort of be real. But then after that, computers since like the 1970s have been crowdsourced, which is why we have so much technology. I mean, it's just unbelievable. But crowdsourcing largely, aircraft were developed that way.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of things technologically were done that way. So what Mark and I are proposing, because this hasn't really been fully developed yet, is the notion that medicine and health is really a crowdsource issue. It's not something you want to pay the government for.
Of course, like a lot of people associate crowdsource with other websites like Kickstarter, where people go on and they say they try to get funding from people to source their project. What we're talking about is something a little bit different. And actually, there's some environmental crowdsourcing where people get you to go bird watch or something in your region.
I did this when we started having the frog epidemic, the lost frog epidemic back in the 1990s, when all of a sudden, amphibian populations were collapsing.
Did you have something to do with that?
I did not cause it. Turns out that it was a scientific study that caused it. I don't know if you're aware of that, but I'll explain it to you. Back about 25 years ago, frog populations, in North America and then everywhere in the world started to collapse. Like just the number of frogs that you'd see during the day went from pretty much very common. They'd be jumping across the porch when I went outside as a kid to, nowhere, right? And so it became this huge crowdsourced environmental study. And I actually developed some instrumentation called a frog logger that would listen to frog calls and try to count how many, do some analysis as an FFT and try to figure out how many frogs there were when you place this thing. It was sort of like one of those hunting cameras, only it was acoustic. It wasn't a camera image. So there's a long history of people figuring out problems when we get together collectively, right, Mark? So
that's right.
What Mark's suggesting, and I agree with it wholeheartedly, is that we need to look at health and solving some of these big health problems by pushing, the bureaucrats out of the way and figuring it out. So it's experimental. So in a way, you have to step forward and sort of volunteer for it. Now, Mark mentioned that they're looking for money. Well, at a university, they're not taking money to cure diseases. Right? They're taking money to pay salaries. It has become what Eisenhower predicted in his 1961 farewell speech, which is the academic elite complex, sort of like he talked about it in the military-industrial complex speech. Maybe I'll put a link to it for you. He predicted the military-industrial complex. It predicted the academic intellectual elite, that they would be sucking money off the federal government and start abusing it. Yeah. And it's a fact. And the second one came true. We live in a world of that now.
Yeah, but I don't think people are aware of the standard study. And I just wanted to let's describe a standard NIH-funded study.
Oh, gosh, I just ate, man. Do you have to
I know. Yeah, but we started talking about this, and he got angry, and we had to come.
I know, I had to stop eating because I was so angry.
He was so angry, we had to get up and come make a show.
I had to stop eating and go, let's go be grumpy for a while.
He didn't even clean his plate.
Get out of my system.
Yeah, we had to.
You waited until he was done before you started talking about it.
Well, of course.
Thanks.
But anyway, no. So let's talk about let's just pick a topic. What do we want to solve? Maybe some pain issue.
Say chronic pain.
Would we be solving a problem or just measuring a problem?
Well, in academia, we would be measuring
the problem. Okay, so this is not providing a solution. This is just measuring a problem. So basically, let's talk about all the things that you would do. People were going to write a grant. They spend probably 6 months to a year writing a grant saying, here's what we're going to do. We're going to recruit subjects and then bring them in and study them. And at the end of 5 years, we're going to be able to detail answer about something.
They tell you this, and that's the whole thing. So it's a big study, multi-millions of dollars, multi-center. But in the end, you end up with this paucity. It's kind of like well, first of all, a lot of these studies, when they finally get around to publishing them in peer review, the punchline at the bottom is this needs to be studied more, needs further study. So when you read a paper like that, that's a cop-out. They're not giving you an answer. They're asking for more money and more time.
So let's say they're doing a pain study of one particular type of pain. I won't mention which type just because we don't want to.
Yeah, this is.
We don't want to. It's going to keep it generic.
Say.
Yeah. So, but let's say they're going to do one type of study, and now they're going to set up their study. Now, to set up their study to get approval, they have to have power analysis on their study.
My favorite power analysis.
So as you weren't here, but Professor Know-It-All said you have to do power analysis to show.
Yeah, but he's kind of an asshole.
Yeah.
Sorry.
To show that you can actually get the right results.
That's right.
And this is
just the truth and only the truth here. Even if we're wrong, at least we think we're right.
So within the university, you have an institutional review board who makes sure that your study's worthwhile. The only way it's worthwhile is if the answers you get are going to be the right ones. Yeah. And the only way to get the right answers is
something called power analysis.
Is to have power analysis.
So they say to you, okay, what is the data that you're going to test against your control group? And then what is the data you're going to get in your study? And red lights should be going off now because you don't have that data yet, right? Now, what is the data you're going to have? And then you have to actually analyze whether or not they're different and how many, the N in each group, how many you have to have, correct me if I'm wrong, basically amounts to how big does your N have to be to have enough power, statistical power, that the averages of the two groups are statistically different.
Okay, so with the brain gauge, I'll give you an example. We first started doing studies on the brain gauge, and I was like, well, my background, I've been in a completely different world. And so I was kind of thinking, okay, I know if we look at this type of patient versus this type of subject, well, we're going to see about a 50 to 100% difference. We need an N of 1. That wasn't going to fly. Okay. And they's like, well, you'll see a difference right away. It's like, well, that's the point. But what we're trying to do is, can we develop methods that are sensitive really across all neurological disorders?
So your first mistake was you were trying to actually solve a problem for society.
Yeah.
All right. Boom.
Well, I got shot down on that one.
Yeah, they don't want you to do that because if you solve a problem, they don't get paid.
So then you redefine it and say, well, I want to categorize all these things and come up with different ways of looking at different populations. And I also want to, we want to refine our method to get better and better and better. Oh, you can't change your method.
No, that's another thing.
You got to keep doing the same thing. It's like, no, we'll do first study. We'll look at a few subjects, and then we'll say,
you get into,
you know what, that's not good. So let's change it. Well, so of course, and the UNC IRB can now fire me, but that's what they have, because I'm no longer doing any human subject studies.
Yeah, we stopped doing them.
Really can't do anymore there.
You can't do them.
But
if you find a flaw, a methodological flaw that makes the study really not work well, and you find it right at the beginning, you're not allowed to stop. You got to keep burning money.
I knew people that did the same study for 5 years in a row,
knowing that it was
when
wrong.
They knew within 2 weeks what they were doing was wrong.
They didn't ever have a chance to just try it.
So
just try it, see how it works, what's good, what's bad, how to adjust it. No, they have to prove from the beginning that it's going to work. And then before you can ever touch a human being, you have to get all this red tape approved. And then once it's approved, you can't change anything. And then we'll get a hater, I'm sure, who says, oh, yes, you can put in an IRB, addendum, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, try it sometime.
Yeah.
Yeah, come a little closer to the screen. I'm going to give you a slap.
Yeah. So if there's
it doesn't work that way.
There's an infinite number of parameters to deliver a diagnostic or develop an assessment tool, then, you get to pick one out of that, and you got to guess that it's right.
Because it's a statistical expedient, they want one thing, and it's got to be really well defined so that it can be statistically shown to be different from one other thing. And that one other thing is usually an extremely narrowly defined group, right?
Yeah, and so let's talk about the next part of that process.
I know how to get them angry. Can you tell us? Change colors already. All right.
Defining inclusion and exclusion criteria. Okay, so we're going back to our pain study. Well, we're going to study one type of pain. One type of pain. And you have inclusion. We're going to include pain type 1. We're going to exclude anybody who has a migraine, TMJD, back pain,
Anybody
leg pain.
Undergone any other kind of treatments, anybody over a certain age or under a certain age, and very often these studies become so narrow, they'll be like, you must be a 58-and-a-half-year-old person, plus or minus 2 months.
They think we're joking now.
They think we're joking, but look it up. There's a few really popular drugs that were tested on such a narrow group of people because they're trying so hard to get the statistical, their power analysis keeps telling them, well, you're going to need, what you're doing really doesn't work. So you have to play the statistics, and the way you do that is by inclusion, exclusion.
So I think our viewers are sophisticated to understand that if you do enough
both
statistics, both viewers know that
smart enough.
If you take, let's say you take 100 subjects in group A, 100 subjects in group B, you can find, and because they've got a little bit of variation neurologically or whatever, we'll see a 3% difference. That's the way most tests were. And even in my field, that's what a lot of papers showed. They do actually, a lot of papers in a lot of fields now still will show, they'll do test after test and say, look, we get a 3% difference in this measure. Tell you what, if you were a clinician, if you're somebody using a diagnostic tool and it gave you a 3% difference, would you care if their heart rate was 79 instead of 75?
A lot of this stuff,
would you put
a lot
any
of this
criterion
stuff
on
is this way. It's statistically significant, but it's not important. And a famous one was a diet study that came out when I was in graduate school. We analyzed it, where they looked at like 200 people, in each group. And they showed that a certain diet, which was, I think it was eating a wet paper or something really that nobody would do, showed a significant improvement in weight. So that over 6 weeks, there was a weight difference between the study group, which is extremely narrowly defined people, very narrow demographic, versus the weight control group. And the difference was 0.5 pound. So if you have to change your eating habits and struggle for the rest of your life and suffer, are you going to do all that for 0.5 pound? And the answer is no. But it was statistically significant, but it was not important, and they published it.
That's right.
It splashed into the news as like, this big study shows that doing this very strange and unpleasant thing, it will change your weight by 0.5 pound. Okay, there's easier ways to get rid of the 0.5 pound of body weight. I can tell you for sure, right? Okay.
So when we started developing our measures, I wanted to find things that had 100% difference. Or, and everybody thought we were completely nuts. But I said, well, that just makes sense to me because everything I knew about brain dynamics, we saw huge changes in brain fluctuations with very subtle insults. So we just said, well, we should be able to develop measures that were very sensitive to that. And people just didn't like it. So especially when you put in your inclusion, exclusion criteria, we actually, when we were presenting the data one time, and one of my students was presenting data. He had 40 subjects, and he showed huge differences. I mean, we're talking 50 to 100% difference in one subject group versus another. Person in the audience complained and said that we hadn't used enough subjects. And it turned out that this person typically used 3 subjects in his studies to find a 3 to 5% difference.
This is the thing. Anonymity in scientific reviews is abused too. It's like, oh, you have to do this and that, and they want to load you with things you just can't do within the system. Well, you'd have to look at 5,000 subjects, even though they're publishing 3. I remember the first big attack I got doing, muscle tissue engineering was from a guy who had published a total of 4 specimens, and I was publishing, I think, 350 in this. Wow. Well, that's not enough data. So I had literally 10 times as many as he had ever published in his entire body of research. And and I put them all into one paper because I was trying to show a bunch of useful, cool things. And his response was, well, that's not enough. 10 times more than he had done in an entire career. And this is not hyperbole or anything. This is just reality, right? So,
anyway, somebody's ringing.
I think that's another extemporaneous.
Anyway, maybe we should.
Why don't we?
We've got enough grumpiness for an intro. I think we can probably carry over into the next one.
That's you ringing. So we're going to stop.
We're going to stop now.
Mark gets control of his digital world, and we're gonna stop being grumpy for
30 seconds.
For 30 seconds, and we're going to come back in part 2, and we're going to talk about all the good stuff related to crowdsourced funding.
Yeah.
So
we'll see you later. Explain what it is.
Right. Let me see now that Mark's off screen, no, I thought I was going to be able to go solo there. All right. We will see you later.